Alright, so this whole member deck review thing has really taken off, and I have no less than 2 decks to review for Drepurs from the same member, and I have another one coming up as well. And since these ones are for the same warband, I initially thought I would clump them up into one review, and also then allow us to compare them, which one is the most reliable, more or less dice dependent, that sort of thing, but also which one we shouldn't forget would be the most fun to play. I'm still going to review both decks, but I will do so in a 2-part installment instead, since it would just simply be too lengthy a video otherwise. So yeah, stay tuned for part 2 after this one. These 2 decks are from a very successful player and an event organizer as well. And if I'm not reading this incorrectly, one of the 2 founders of Army Painters. This is quite an honor. And to have him as a member on the channel as well is awesome. And come June 1st, I'm actually going to attend at an event that he is organizing, a Nemesis event in Copenhagen. I haven't actually decided what to play yet though, so if you have any ideas what I should take, feel free to hit me up in the comments, because I am at a loss. I find too many warbands fun to play, so I'm having a very hard time to decide there. So yeah, but let's move on. And just up front, I don't necessarily try to look for things to change in these decks just for the sake of changing them, if I don't feel they could need a tweak. But nonetheless, the dissecting and analyzing of these decks will still be, for me at least, very worthwhile and very interesting. And I hope for you as well. So, some information up front. The first of these 2 decks is for Drepurs with Fearsome Fortress, which placed 3rd at the LVO, and the second one is Drepurs with Breakneck Slaughter, which latter placed tied for 5th at the Warhammer Worlds. The first list is built more towards board control, flex / aggro, while the second, with all the mayhem the Breakneck Slaughter offers, is built more towards pure aggro. So let's start with the Fearsome Fortress one. And before we get going, if you want your deck reviewed, feel free to become a member, and then I'll give you a link to the member Discord and we'll connect over there. If you don't feel like publicly displaying my dissection over on the YouTubes, simply getting feedback on the Discord is certainly an option as well. Well, with that out of the way and any clicking left to do on the subscribe buttons and like buttons and all that stuff, let's get cracking. Let's just quickly also mention something about the Wraith Creepers. This is an older warband. Some of you are familiar with it, some of you might not be as familiar with them. They are a 4-man ethereal, flying that is, death warband who has just traditionally been a very strong staple since their incursion in the game. Initially they were downright broken, I would say, but after a bit of a nerf, they are certainly in a more healthy spot. So they were nerfed in that the patrician, the drummer that is, could not push all across the field, but only friendly fights while they were in friendly territory, so up to basically no man's land, but not beyond it. So from the last text of the friendly territory onto the no man's land, I should clarify. So yeah, that's quite a significant nerf, but they are still very solid. And I think 2 cards have been restricted in Championship as well, but yeah. And I think also since they arrived in the game, a lot of other strong warbands have obviously come into the fray as well, to kind of indirectly tone them down. They have 2 fights with 4 wounds each and 2 dodge respectively, already uninspired, with a leader and a patrician, while the 2, shouldn't say chef units, but because they are pretty good, but remaining fighters at least sport 3 wounds each and 1 dodge. Although inspired, they are all 2 dodge and they do inspire quite easily, which was also one of the major concerns when they arrived, how easy they inspired. Paired with their lethality and the prevalence of range 2, they inspire apart from their drummer boy when they are within 2 hexes of an enemy fighter at the start of their activation, and the patrician can help with that by pushing 1 friendly fighter, including himself, that is, in friendly territory closer to the closest enemy fighter, as a reaction to the opponent's power step ending, which is then paired with their range 2, a very solid mechanic, since they are all rather accurate inspired as well, with the leader sporting a crazy 3 smash 2 damage with a built-in reroll, and the shafts getting cleave and snare respectively on top of their 2 smash 2 damage, 2 ranged attack uninspired. So with that out of the way, let's check the first of these two decks. So the Fearsome Fortress is a strong passive positioning deck. So with the strong innate push mechanic this warband has, that I just mentioned, this should be a very solid option. So let's check these searches first. Ethereal Hunters is just a crazy easy objective where you simply need to charge through a blocked or occupied hex. So that's just silly easy. You don't have to move through your own enemy. You don't even need to succeed with the charge. So that's just very easy. So no successes needed. Compare this to something like the Acrobatic Assault, which I talked about in the last installment in this series when I reviewed the Grisel's deck there, which needs your fighter to specifically move through the enemy fighter and then also succeed with the attack at the end of the charge. So that's just so much worse of an objective. It's an obvious inclusion, of course. Masked Blades is next with another silly objective, really, with making an attack with supports. Given 3 of them can attack from range 2 and with their push mechanic to boot, this is also an obvious pick. Also, it does not need to hit to score you the objective. So yeah, very, very good. Unstoppable Death is last of the faction searches here, with taking someone out of action with a charge action. This is at least less of an auto score, but with 2 in faction, basically, at least +1 strength cards. This isn't even that matchup dependent, and the requirements for this skill is not very high. Next up is Bolt Sortie for shorting from a feature token in friendly territory. This is one of my first picks when using the Fearsome Fortress, and with their ability to push on to feature tokens, this is very scoreable even in round 1, which is not usually the case unless drawing into a very favorable push hand up front. So yeah, very good synergy with the warband here. Earthworks needs us to put a guard token on a fighter on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory. So yeah, deploy next to a feature token, let your opponent take the first activation basically, push on to that feature token, slap on a guard token in your first activation, and get the scoring rolling. Only thing I will say here is there is no tech apart from Siege Masters to score this without spending an activation in the deck, but it's still, as depicted in the aforementioned scenario, very easy to do. It could have been made even easier with the Walking Wall upgrade here, which is actually not included. So let's see if we can squeeze that one in. Yeah, I quite like the Walking Wall upgrade, so yeah, I think there's very good synergy overall with including that one. So yeah, but let's get back to it. Last one here is To the Walls. This one needs us to hold more objectives after activation, while also each objective within 1 of no one's territory being occupied by a friendly fighter. And this is pretty much the only objective here I'm not all that sold on. I think it could be troublesome if your opponent is trying to do the similar thing, or even playing Fearsome Fortress for that matter. I think this could be pretty matchup dependent, the card, I guess, and could sit as a brick on your hand for quite a while if we kind of face the wrong opponent, I guess. The faction deck doesn't really offer a ton of good options to swap that one out. Landing an attack with Cleave is certainly doable with an Inspired Hackful, and there is an upgrade to hand out Cleave as well, but I wouldn't invest in that one, even if Cleave on top of their leader's profile is as scary. I think he's accurate enough. Hackfell is also one of the most likely to die with the 3 wound fighter starting on 1 dodge, and the opponent's likely fearing Cleave more than Ensnare, thus targeting him more than the latter to avoid him going to that nasty Cleave. Vengeance of Nagash is also pretty bad for basically Victorious Duel, but for only 1 glory, so yeah, pass on that one as well. From the Fearsome Fortress we have Impregnable Defenses, with successfully defending on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory. This is, I think, a pretty solid objective, but it also requires a fairly aggressive opponent, but I still think we will get hit during the course of the game, and we will stay very close to within 1 hex of no one's territory. So yeah, I think certainly that's an option, because we have good defenses inspired on all of our fighters, which we will become pretty fast. I think especially with the extra token we get to place from Fearsome Fortress, and possibly like another one from Plunder or other stuff, I think it's not bad inclusion. Raw materials needs us to place a token within one of no ones, while also the enemy having a fighter out of action. A bit slow, I would say, in round 1, given a more sturdy matchup. So I don't really fancy it as a round 1 draw. For me, it's a toss-up between To the Walls and Impregnable Defenses. I see Jonas has also included the +1 defense on a feature token ploy, so there's also synergy in that way, but I think that ploy is more there to kind of discourage the enemy from hitting us than to kind of lure them into doing so. I would personally prefer the Impregnable Defenses to the Walls card, although it's a toss-up. It's like 50-50 almost, but I'm gonna stick with my guns here and say that the Impregnable Defenses is slightly more to my liking. Let's move into the end phases. Deathly Blooms is hold 1 in enemy territory for 1 glory. Pretty simple, but it's just 1 glory. Inevitable Advance is 1 glory for everyone having move or charge. 4 fighters, very easy. Also though, just 1 glory. Just don't forget to move your petitioner, I guess. Conquer Domain is 1 glory for a friendly fighter on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory, and an extra for each other one. I think this is a solid pick, but it also convinces me even more that the Walking Wall upgrade should be an inclusion here, as this is made even simpler with that one in the mix. Siege Breakers is 2 glory for no enemy fights in your territory, so any end phase denial basically. I'm always a bit dubious on these types of cards, as it's wildly matchup dependent and I don't really want to bank on my opponents playing in a specific way. Still, it's not unlikely that the condition will be met in one of the end phases. I'll have to evaluate this after seeing what we could include instead, but I would also be interested to hear how consistently Jonas is scoring this card. So I would love for him to chime in the comments here. Stockpile is my favorite here, with holding to a sum of 6, which is, in my experience, a very easy feat to accomplish. Underground Fortress is quite lofty, with 3 survivors, over which 2 needs to be adjacent. The latter part is not hard with all the push, but 3 survivors, given when we draw this, could prove quite hard. The patrician will most likely stay back drumming on his 4 wounds, and the leader will likely make it, if not to the end, at least quite far into the game. But the 2 chaff models might crumble early, so versus hard aggro this feels like a stretch. So yeah, Siege Breakers and Underground Fortress, 2 maybe cards here, but after reviewing it a bit, I'm sure Jonas will agree with me on this as well. There's not a ton of good options here, and I think if we fill the blanks out with 1 glory stuff, that's not even that much more scoreable. We simply have 2 lower glory total. We are already only on what I would argue being like bare minimum of 15. I could see some cases with going all the way down to 14. So going much lower than this might be a subpar decision, I guess. This is a cagier build than the Breaking Slaughter one, so hopefully we can pull through to score the Underground Fortress if we don't overextend too much and have some decent luck on the defensive rolls. So yeah, and if I remember correctly, it's also something Jonas mentioned to me earlier, that the Fearsome Fortress build lately has been having a tough time outscoring hard aggro, so that's just a caveat that we will have with this deck pairing, really. Let's move over to the Gambits, where we find Deadly Vengeance, where we get to strike back as a reaction to being taken out of action, which hopefully won't happen all that soon if we want to score Underground Fortress. But yeah, for a less accurate warband, I wouldn't value this as highly, but given the prevalence of range 2, making it actually possible for us to hit back, and the fact that we hit quite reliably with this warband, and with a couple of +1 damage cards in the mix, this should oftentimes land us a quite significant hit back. So I think it's a decent inclusion for sure. Drifting Death is next, and yeah, it's an amazing push of pushing 2 fighters 1 step closer to the closest enemy fighter. Not much to argue here, really. It helps to set up massed blades and proc the buff from the Murder Pact upgrade. Innovating Beat is next for -1 damage in the next activation step. I've spoken earlier on how I prefer accuracy debuffs to damage debuffs, and buffs for that matter. But given how pivotal it is to keep as many of our fighters alive as possible. I guess it's not terrible, at least inclusion. Even if I'm unsure it would make my cut, I'll get back to that one. Horrifying Shriek is distraction, but within 3 hexes of a friendly fighter. So yeah, pretty much not a huge restriction to distraction, basically. Very solid pick. Methodical Attacks is a chance to remake a failed attack. Always a solid inclusion. Just keep in mind that if you play these types of cards after the attack at the end of a charge super action, you won't score cards like Unstoppable Death, since the attack made as part of the charge did in fact not hit. Still a given inclusion, I think. Unending Pursuit is yet another push. Unrestricted push 1 friendly fighter 1 hex. So we have 2 very solid push cards. +1 push enemy card for a warband that can already push so much with their just fighter card mechanic is pretty crazy and honestly a bit lazy, I think, and an uncreative design, as they also have range 2. But it is what it is, I guess, and of course I can't argue on its inclusion. Then we move into the Faering Fortress Gambits with Bound Spirit for some pretty surefire ping damage that will proc a lot, but yet another card that would benefit from including the Walking Wall. Ping is a strong thing in the game, and with the lack of damage 3 up front at least, this could help get opponents into kill range with charging them and scoring the Unstoppable Death, for example. Healing Ward is a heal 1 friendly fighter on a feature token for 1. Not generally too hot for heal cards, but this is borderline an elite team. So it's basically a 3-man warband with a push bot, so heal could be useful, I guess. Makeshift Bombardment is push or stagger enemy fighter within 3 hexes of a friendly fighter on a feature token. Basically another distraction and yet another card that could benefit from Walking Wall. So yeah, pretty darn good. Ready for Anything is +1 defense for friendly fighters on a feature token in the upcoming activation. So once we get all of our fights to 2 dodge, this is pretty good mileage, since we'll find the defensive crit fairly often on 3 dice. It's just for a single activation though, and this is generally not a card I'm too hot on, but I'll have to consult the alternatives. So yeah, I'll mention 2 cards that I think is very solid from the Faering Fortress here, and that's Redeploy and Take Your Positions, and especially the first one I think could help us score Underground Fortress, and with the Walking Wall in the mix, it's made even easier to fulfill the conditions on the push card. Out of the 2, I think Redeploy is the one I really want to see in the mix, and I think I would personally swap out the -1 damage over the +1 defense for a single activation. I'd rather not be hit at all than reduce the damage, I guess. I think you could make the case for ditching Ready for Anything for Take Your Positions as well, but I'm going to leave it at that, but still mention the option. Let's move into the upgrades, where we find Bitter Strength for, +1 strength. Obvious inclusion, of course, and a restricted card in Championship. Deathly Vigor for +1 boom. Yep. Murder Pact is next, an amazing card that either means +1 damage or +1 dice, depending on if the fighter is assisted or is giving out assist. Just disgustingly good, really, and should probably be restricted as well. But yeah. Next one is restricted though. Pall of Fear for -1 dice from range 1 and 2 that targets this fighter. Very solid card for an already quite tanky warband. Point of Death is next for rerolls on charges. Absolutely disgusting for the leader with 3 hammers, 2 damage, range 2, with 2 rerolls. So slap a Murder Pact +1 dice or a damage on top of that, and you'll do the math on your odds of dodging that bullet of death. Bold Engineer is next with +2 move, but not during charges. But I guess Jonas is not taking this card for that, but more or less solely based on the reaction printed on the card, where this fighter can react to any friendly activation to slap an adjacent feature token, empty, mind you, into this fighter's hex, which is obviously very useful for a lot of stuff here, so I can't argue on its inclusion. Hardy Scout is +1 wound while not in friendly territory, and +1 move regardless of your position. But you can't have it if you are a large fighter, so only works on Hackful and Grodrick, since the card, even though the leader and partition is not large, but it will make them large, so it will instantly break on them. I think it's still a very solid inclusion, as we need as many fighters alive as possible for the feature token holding and the Underground Fortress scoring. This isn't a pure aggro build after all, and we should make sure that our fighters stick around. Mason's Great Hammer is next with an attack I think won't see a ton of use, even though it's a very good attack if you're base to base, and at least better than Hackfell and Godric's attacks with the Grievous and Cleave in the mix here. But the reaction, I guess, is why it is in here, with triggering in response to this fighter's activation. With removing the feature token this fighter is on and swapping in another available one. Still, I'm not totally sold on this one actually. It doesn't really help with Stockpile or Deathly Blooms, as we can only swap in an available feature token, meaning a feature token that is on the sideline, which is after placing the extra one we get to do after the setup with the Fearsome Fortress plot card, the remaining cover/block text token, and not then an objective, unless an objective has already been removed in another way previous to this. So I think it's not really an essential inclusion for me. If the raw material search were in the mix, I would be on board here, but it's not, so I might be missing something here, which is certainly possible. Next one is Siege Masters, where we get to react to our activation as long as we are on a feature token, with giving a guard token to 2 friendly fighters on feature tokens within 1 hex of no one's territory. This fighter is also included as an option for that, I should mention. Guard tokens are good mileage for a 2-dodge warband, I think, and it helps score earthworks, so I'm not going to argue with that one either. Starmo is the last one here with a range 4 to smash 1 damage attack with stagger. I'm not sure it's an absolutely essential inclusion really, given the push tech and range 2 here, honestly. There is a place for it in a way. If we are getting sniped to death while standing on the feature tokens we don't really want to move away from, it could help with some counterpunch there, but I don't think it's as important as the cards I want to see included. So yeah, let's consult the bones and let's see what my think brains have to say. So I don't think there's anything worthwhile left to swap in from the faction deck first up, but as I've already hinted at on several occasions, I think the Walking Wall should definitely go in, with always making this fighter's hex counted as being a feature token, which obviously has an enormous amount of synergy with the rest of the deck, not least Underground Fortress, which is already quite lofty, but made slight easier with this, and also it helps to boost the glory we can squeeze out of something like Conquer Domain. Apart from that one, I think I quite like the Stalwart Sentinel. We already want to be on the feature tokens quite heavily with this build, so being unable to be pushed away from there seems like a very solid thing to have up our sleeves, especially given a fighter equipped with the aforementioned Walking Wall. It more or less completely denies pushes from drivebacks and cards alike while within 1 hex of no one's territory. I'll note that this card only denies your opponents to push you. You can still push them with cards and mechanics. I would 100% leave it out if it was just straight up push immunity, since some cards are just like that, and those are very double-edged swords to take, especially for warbands such as this one. I think it would be more of a curse than blessing for sure, but alas, luckily for us it is not, so I will swap that one in. To make way for these, I am going then sideline the Mason's Great Hammer, and I think also the Stormo will have to go as well. I mean, the ranged option is certainly not terrible, as I mentioned earlier, but I just don't feel it is as essential as these 2 cards I want to see included. So yeah, that's how I would tweak this deck, which finished 3rd on the LVO. So feel free to roast me to your heart's content now. So yeah, but hey, Jonas put me up to this, so I'm gonna blame him, and I'm not one to back down from a challenge, right? So I hope you liked this deck review, and I'll get back to you on part 2 here when we talk about the Breakneck Slaughter one. So yeah, feel free to click all the buttons and stuff. So if you want to have your deck reviewed, become a member. It's like $3.99 or $4.99 if you want to support me a little bit extra, to have free access to the member Discord and the ability to have your deck reviewed and a bigger influence on all the stuff I put out, basically. So I'll say it again in the end credits thing that's about to roll now. So yeah, take care. Bye. This is me again, chiming in to thank you for watching the video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment. All of those things help me out immensely. If you feel so inclined, do consider to become a member to gain a greater influence over the content, early access, and just generally help me out. If you like this particular video especially much, feel free to click the thanks button as well to leave a small donation. All of those things are 100% optional, and I will never keep videos permanently locked behind a paywall, as my main goal is to spread the love for these games as much as possible. A special thanks to my members, whose legendary names are scrolling right before your eyes at this very instant. Don't forget, the games are not only about winning, but also creating unforgettable memories with your friends and opponents. That's it for me. See you soon. Bye bye.